Hi, everyone, and welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Always delighted to be talking authoring, creating, and I am a big fan of the worlds of science fiction, fantasy. On this episode, I'm talking with someone who takes a very literary and unique twist on those genres, and that is author Donna Glee Williams. Donna Glee, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining.
I am so happy to be here, Jason. It's good of you to have me. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime, anytime. I will mention the works of yours that I'm familiar with, Dreamers being one of those, The Braided Path and The Night Field. And you were also kind enough to share a copy of The Night Field with me, which I greatly enjoyed reading. So thank you for the work, first of all, and curious about the connection to writing. What connected you with storytelling?
Well, that's an interesting question if you go way back. I think it was originally because in my earliest youth, like toddler, preschool times, my family moved around a lot.
Mhm.
And that meant a lot of time spent in cars. And I'm talking, I believe my mother totted it up once that we moved 18 times in the first 3 years of my life. And
Wow.
these were long moves, like we might be in the car from Kentucky to Mexico, from Mexico to Minnesota. And uh, this was before there was digital entertainment. And the only thing that my parents could do to keep me from exploding in toddler energy was to tell me stories.
Mm.
And some of these, well, in the car, most of them were stories from their own childhoods. Some of them were extended jokes. Um, some of them were recapitulating uh, stories they had read. And so stories were like a matter of survival
Mm.
for a kid that had to sit still for many hours at a time, very often. And then a little bit later, I think stories were important because I was always an outsider. When my family moved to Mexico, I was the gringa kid that was the outsider, and when we moved back to the United States, I was the kid with the Spanish accent that hadn't lived a normal path.
Mm.
So when I first read Superman. Now, I'm 69 now, so you can picture the comics that were available for me.
Mhm.
But the idea that someone could have been left somewhere by their real people and have to grow up as an alien, possibly waiting for your real people to come and get you again sometime, really helped me make sense of things.
Uh,
That somewhere were my people, but I just got left on Earth by mistake. And then the other factor that I think was important in story grokking was the church. I was born into what we would now call um, a deep fundamentalist Christian religion.
mhm.
Back then, we didn't think of ourselves as fundamentalists. We just thought of ourselves as right, and everybody else is wrong. And my life was rich in Bible stories and in King James English and in the poetry of the hymns, because we were one of those um, churches that only sang. We didn't do the whole organ piano thing. It was all about singing. So the church brought a great richness of stories that I now recognize are some of them deep archetypal stories that tap into the deepest well of humanity and the powerful poetry of language. And then, of course, there was also country music. I was raised on country music. Country music, that is a music of stories. And I'm talking about the old country music, not what is now being sold as country music.
Yeah, yeah. I love that weaving of inspiration from family storytelling to religion to country music. Sounds like we have much in common in that way.
Oh, you too.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. So as I mentioned, you shared the night fields with me, and I'm curious, or the night field, excuse me. Um, Curious how you would describe your approach in that book and in your work, maybe for someone out there who's listening and who's not familiar.
You know, describing it is a little bit of a problem. uh, the one word description for me is eco fantasy or eco fable, in that it grapples with real world ecology issues. Um, it is definitely what we in the fantasy and science fiction business would call a second world fantasy, because it is set on a world that is not this world. Um, it is fantasy in the sense that uh, the same rules of science and physics don't apply there. The when I was in graduate school studying fantasy and science fiction, we discussed a lot what is fantasy and what is science fiction. And one definition was, if the cover is in browns and greens, it's fantasy, and if the cover is in grays, silvers, and blues, it's science fiction. This is the level we got to. But one of the notions was that if it is a place that you can get to by traveling in one of the dimensions, either by going far enough out, far enough down, far enough back in time, forward in time, that's science fiction. But if it's a place you simply cannot get to by any normal dimensional travel, then it's fantasy. And in that sense, that this book is fantasy. But in another sense, it's hard science fiction, because the environmental science on which this book is based, which is from eco-tipping points theory, the theory developed by Dr. Jerry Martin, that's hard science. So do we call this fantasy? Do we call it science fiction? It's a little bit of both. Another difficulty of describing it is it young adult? Because there are the main character is definitely a teenage girl moving into becoming a young woman. Or is it adult? Because it takes people to realities that I personally am not in a hurry for our youngsters to have to grapple with. So I guess in terms of categorization, it's a little bit tough, but I think fundamentally it's an adventure story. It's a hero adventure story. It a little bit defies Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey template, because there's also some of the heroes staying hinted at, and there's also, it's more of a collective. It's not a single hero that brings back the boon to the people, but a single hero carries it a certain distance, and then someone else picks it up. But when I'm if someone is talking to me, I guess I would go with a hero story that happens in a world that is not this world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I enjoyed your afterword about Campbell too. It was really interesting to read your thinking through literary theory too, and can tell you're someone who puts a lot of thought into the stories they tell.
Yes. Uh, the thought that went into the grappling with Joseph Campbell actually came after. When I'm writing, it is more like trying not to think and trying to catch fire with some source that is beyond my conscious know-how, conscious mind. So I'm always grateful for that. But afterwards, there's some serious thinking going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that speaks really well to the next question as far as creative steps that you go through. I'm always interested in hearing about the ways that people craft and sort of that Bradbury question of where ideas come from.
Ah, well, this one um, came from many places, but I guess the original seed crystal was some work I did. I got a Fulbright, a senior environmental leadership Fulbright, to go to India and study a group of villages that had been uh, living in a sustainable farming mode until modern need for cash caused them to start farming cotton. And as Southern folks know, cotton is devastating to the soil. You know, it is just really rough on the soil. And these people, as they moved into monoculture, had to invest in chemical inputs for the soil and then also in pesticides because they were doing monoculture that attracted the pests to their fields in a way that mixed agriculture never did. So they became basically enslaved to the purveyors of pesticides and chemical fertilizers.
Mm.
And when I say the word enslaved, I'm not being hyperbolic. You know, they gradually went so far into debt that they were having to put their children into indentured labor. Their health was destroyed.
Mhm.
There were many suicides. Some of them probably because of the financial devastation, but some of them, I think, because many of these pesticides are neuroactive, you know, they're neurotoxins. Um, and it was just catastrophic.
Mm.
And then, like an alcoholic coming off of their drinking, one guy tried raising cotton without chemical inputs, using some traditional methods and using some modern scientific based strategies for pest control. And he was able to do it.
Mm.
Uh,
Mhm.
and his yield brought him the same amount of money as if he had used all these chemicals. And then the next year, a couple more of them did. And then eventually, that whole village went pesticide free and developed these sort of soft technologies of how to do that. And then also, like alcoholics, you know how they sponsor each other? Well, they started helping other villages to
Mm.
go off these pesticides. And this story was so heroic to me. I mean, it was just amazing. And we did write it. My mentor and I wrote an academic article for a British publication called The Ecologist but it kept working in me as a storyteller. And and then one day I saw this picture, some little meme online of a little girl crossing a bridge. And that gave me Pinboy, my main character,
Mhm.
in her childhood. And I so much wanted that to be a short story. You know, I tried my best to make it a short story because I am a lazy hound. But when I wrote it as a short story, it was just so preachy you wouldn't want to read it. I mean, it was just really uh, unbearable. Uh, and and so I kept writing it, and even after people said give up on it, and actually leaned harder into the environmental message, which is so counterintuitive, but it became less preachy. And now when people read the book, nobody complains that it's preachy,
Mhm. Mhm.
and it actually is quite passionate about the issues of pesticide and monoculture, even though those words are never used in the book because it's a fantasy, right?
Yeah.
So, so the spark came from that, but some of the detailing came from the fact that when I worked with public school teachers at the North Carolina Center for the Advancement of Teaching, I was for 10 years the director of our Holocaust and Genocide Education Program,
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
program to help teachers know how to present some of the most important but most difficult history of the last 150 years. Uh, and so a lot of the details of how humans are abused were in my mind. I also, I'm a daughter of the South. I've lived in North Carolina and Louisiana forever. So our heritage of chattel slavery, of sharecropping, and of penal farms is very much part of the background of my life.
Mhm.
So, and there's some remarkable patterns there. That these forms of agricultural abuse of human beings uh, turn up over and over again in different places. And after I wrote this book, my mentor had me read a book in Spanish called Prisión Verde, the Green Prison, um, about the U.S. fruit companies' takeover of Central America. And I swear there were scenes in it that could have come out of my book, The Night Field,
Mhm.
even though this was written, almost 100 years ago in a completely different setting. But it's what happened to the folks that were being exploited to raise bananas for the North American market. Uh, so these things keep coming up again and again. And all of those, I think I was like an antenna or receiving the vibrations of all of those different forms of how agriculture um, can work towards dehumanizing people.
Mhm.
And so the hero, of course, is the one who opposes the dehumanization.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. Well, if I'm a listener out there and I want to find out more about your work, uh, where would be a place that I could do that, either online, in person, and then would you like to share anything about your creative vision for work to come?
Well, sure. The I'm not sure you've gotten it, but one thing that happened is that this book came out in paperback
Hmm.
in the UK last month, and it's coming out again in the United States in paperback this September. So I am all about finding book groups and interviews, and anybody that wants to take on my book in a classroom or a book club. I will be there. I will be there face to face if you want me, and I can get there, or on Zoom if I can't get there. There's a set of questions that were developed by Jerry Martin, the founder of eco tipping points theory, that make it extra usable for classrooms or groups interested in environmental action. And I have invited people that take on the book and are inspired to create their own art to reach out to me. I would love to post it on my website, anything that comes from that. The other thing that I want to draw people's attention to is this book has already inspired a surely amazing suite of songs, an EP by the musician Lynn Morgan Rosser. And they are available to listen to. You can sample them for free on any streaming service or at her website, Lynn Morgan Rosser. On the streaming services, you would look up Songs for the Night Field by Lynn Morgan Rosser. And if you believe in just compensation to our musicians, buy it, or at least go to Ko-fi and buy her a cup of coffee, because since the advent of streaming, getting our musicians paid has become a problem. Like, you buy the book, this rewards me, but you go online and listen to the music without paying, nothing rewards her for the hard work. But anyway, it's strictly glorious music, and it was produced and accompanied by her husband, Chris Rosser of Free Planet Radio, which people that are interested in international music will perhaps know that name. And reach out to me on my website, donnagleewilliams.com. And there's a contact form. I'd love to hear from you if you know of any mischief we can make together.
Love it. Any glimpses for the work to come, the vision, current questions that you're exploring, or anything like that before we close?
I am revising a fantasy that is sort of a mashup of, Waiting for Godot plus early Walt Disney. And I need to revise it because I wrote it years ago and my writing skills have gotten better. So I'm going back and taking that. I'm very excited that a fine independent press in the Northeast has expressed some interest, but I want to get it just sharpened up as much as possible before going to town on that. And I am currently in writers' residencies, and this is something I should probably mention to your listeners, because creative types need to know that there are very interesting places around the world where you can ask for and be given or pay reasonably small amounts for time to work on your own creative projects away from the distractions and demands of your ordinary life. And the way you do that is go online and look up artist residencies. Maybe you know a particular place you want to go to, I knew I was interested in going to Ireland, so I wound up spending 2 weeks on the coast of Kerry in a place called Kilrealik, and now I'm in Wales at a place called Studio Mailer. I'll be here for 3 weeks, and then I'm headed off to speak at the International Association for the Study of Dreams. I should also say, if anybody ever wants to do dream work with me, reach out. Dreams are an important creative source for those of us that are making new stuff, and there are tried and true techniques and technologies for um, mining
Mm.
mining the gold in the night dreams. And I work with a number of groups of people, many of them creatives, not all writers, uh, but to explore our dreams for creative sources, for personal insight, and for spirit and mystery.
Love it, love it. Very interesting work. Love the creative focus. Donna Glee, thank you so much for the time, and I'm glad to have you back anytime to talk about writing and creating.
I'm there for you anytime. Thank you so much for doing the work you do. Really, really, and I'm glad that you're out there, and appreciate the folks that you brought on to talk.
Well, thank you for the kind words. That's very kind.
Well, till we meet again.
Yes, yes, and enjoy Wells.